Welcome to the Insurance Suits Podcast, a bi-monthly podcast brought to you by AIMCO, discussing the issues and the people who are involved in insurance. The views expressed by the moderators and guests represent their own views and opinions, and not necessarily the views and opinions of AIMCO, Insurance Suits, or its advertisers. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Excellent.
I am so glad it is like almost spring, I guess.
I was just saying we're getting into spring. I saw a robin in the tree outside my window yesterday.
That is awesome. I was in, get this, I was in South Dakota earlier this, I was going to say earlier this year. No, earlier this month. It just maybe feels like a year. That I was there to watch some basketball for, March Madness and everything. And they still had snow on the ground. I don't understand how people live like that. I don't get it.
Well, I'm from Minnesota, so I can say you learn to live with it. But I used to tell people when I moved to Chicago, everyone would ask me, you should be used to the cold down here. You're from Minnesota.
Yeah.
And I'd say, one, you never get used to the cold or the snow. And two, it's not really much different from Chicago. It's just a little bit colder and it lasts a little longer. And then like a year later, I was up there in a February and it's a lot colder and there's a lot more snow. And it brought back memories of plugging in our cars at night to make sure they started.
Oh gosh.
Or to run in to get something from a convenience store and you just leave your car running because you don't want to shut it off.
Yeah, my husband was, because I was complaining about the snowbanks that were pushed up and everything, and he said, yeah, this actually, because he's from Iowa, he goes, this is what reminds me of my childhood, seeing all of this. And I said, but the thing is that I don't mind there being like 8-foot snow banks from the parking lots and the road and all this kind of stuff. What bothers me is like the 3 feet of snow that's still on people's lawns. And that means that it has not ever gotten over 32 degrees ever since it last snowed to melt. Like that is what's bending my mind. But
well, maybe they got 5 feet and 2 feet have already melted.
Well, that's true. But thank goodness for spring, huh?
Well, you know what spring reminds me of?
What's tax season? But we've already talked about tax season, so there you go.
Marijuana and insurance.
Yeah. We had Scott talking about business interruption.
Yes, we did. I was kind of wondering, I was talking to a couple of people in AIMCO about trending coverage issues and whatnot.
Yeah.
And someone had mentioned, actually mentioned insurance coverage for marijuana, which I know is in your wheelhouse much more than it's in mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I don't know the difference between the different kinds of marijuana and marijuana versus hemp and what's legal, what's not legal, and what's covered and what's not covered.
Yeah.
Because I know policies are now specific. My understanding is you can get like $1 million in coverage. Generally.
If you're lucky. If you're lucky. Yeah.
So tell me, explain at least to me, probably everyone else watching this knows the difference.
Well, it's always
what is the difference between different kinds of marijuana and how that impacts coverage?
Yeah, well, it's always a good idea to start off at your very base just to make sure. So we have, and it's called cannabis actually, which is a term for me personally, I don't particularly agree with, and we can get into that later, but I still call it marijuana, and I call it marijuana and hemp, and I've got very specific reasons for that. However, if we are being current in our nomenclature. It's called marijuana is called cannabis.
Okay.
So regardless, I will call it cannabis if I'm having to do a writing or if I'm like formally speaking. But even here, I'll say marijuana because I want to distinguish between the two. All right. Harken back to high school biology. Uh, like before the frog dissection that you had to do. Do
Mm-hmm.
you remember the nomenclature issues that we had to do? It's like the
Genus, species.
yeah, the genus, family, species. I don't even know which
Yeah,
way to
yeah.
go. Quite frankly, like I've blocked that from my mind. But anyway, the reason why I dislike using the word cannabis for marijuana is because if you were to look at the scientific nomenclature of the word cannabis and marijuana and hemp,
Mm-hmm.
hemp and marijuana are both cannabis. They come. It's like
So it's
cannabis
not
is
an
the parent.
interchangeable term with cannabis. Do they fall under the
Yes. Yes. Yes.
the
Yes.
umbrella?
Yes. Yeah. So if we were looking at it, cannabis would be the parent, and marijuana and hemp would be the siblings.
Okay.
Right. So then you've got the species, but which would be like indica and sativa or whatever. And in fact, Brenda Wells, who is in AIMCO with us, and oh my God, we should have her. Oh, we should have her on for 420 because it's gonna be April. Oh my God.
Oh,
Oh,
nice.
oh my God, yes. Oh, I said
That
it'll be
that
on
would be awesome.
415, but that's okay. Anyway, because we go out on the 15th and the last day. Anyway, so squirrel. I'm like all distracted. Anyway, so she taught me the funniest thing that she said her students taught her because she could never keep track of how the species worked. And indica will make you really relax, while sativa is supposed to like make you a little bit, jazzed up. And her students had told her, you just remember that indica is like in the couch. I'm like, yeah. Anyway,
That's awesome.
yeah, I know. But okay, so 9 times out of 10 nowadays, there's they're so blended that it doesn't even make any difference.
Okay.
So I mean, you can kind of forget about the species aspect of it, indica and sativa. So anyway, to answer your question, so you asked about what the difference is. So hemp is legal now, according
Okay.
to the 2018 Farm Bill. And the issue is, though, of course, that hemp can only have 0.3% or less of Delta 9 THC in its dry weight.
Okay.
And that's very, very specific. And of course, marijuana is THC Delta 9.
Okay.
And I know a lot of people, when I was talking to my RMI students, my risk management students, for example, they'll go, well, what about Delta 8 and Delta 10 and, the CBD that we've been hearing about, and CBG and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, yeah, that's a whole different, whole different thing. Just hemp is 0.3% or less Delta 9 THC. And usually your marijuana, when it's sold, either medicinally or recreationally, will be 10%.
Right.
So that
Oh,
is
okay.
that is the difference.
Oh, okay. So when we're talking, I guess, insurance coverage,
Mm.
do policies make a distinction between marijuana and hemp?
So there is, and I have this issue. I've got issues. My issues have issues. Of course, I
Get your
think anybody,
soapbox out. Bring
you
out
know,
the soapbox.
yeah, really. I think by now everybody who's listening knows this about me. So it's like it's not anything new. Just hit that fast forward button. Anyway, one of the things that I have an issue with, and it comes back to the word cannabis. So ISO, to call them out specifically, and has a definition for marijuana. And again, they call it by the nomenclature cannabis. And they do mention. This episode of Insurance Suits is sponsored by the American Association of Insurance Management Consultants, or AMCO, a nonprofit trade association comprised of insurance and risk professionals ranging from actuarial, underwriting, acquisition and transactions, and adjuster, agent, and broker standards of care. Find out more at www.aaimco.com. Hemp specifically in that definition. And what that definition will say is cannabis is anything with any amount of THC, any synthetic, any natural THC. They use the word any. And as an attorney, I mean, you know what any means. It means everything, right? And they do use the word hemp. So the issue then becomes, how do we ensure this product, specifically the marijuana, because hemp can be insured since it's federally legal. And we know, of course, marijuana is federally illegal, even though the states say, yeah, it's legal. And there's a whole, I mean, you would know better than I about, and I bet Brenda would know
Brenda will know.
yeah, what's going on with that aspect of it. I just do claims. So
Um, so if you define cannabis, should a policy be breaking out the difference, between, because to call cannabis marijuana isn't really accurate to start with, like just
no,
as a fundamental start of looking at a policy.
I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm glad that you're like seeing that, because I think that's what the problem is. And that's why I don't like using the word cannabis for marijuana. And what I say is, look, if we want to use the word cannabis for marijuana, because the word marijuana has racial overtones, because when you think of who smokes it or who used to smoke it back when it was illegal, it was usually minorities. And so it has these racial overtones.
I did not know that.
Yeah. In fact, one of the reasons why it became illegal, because it used to be legal back in the 20s and the 30s.
Okay.
And the reason why it became illegal was because Mexican nationals were coming in, getting work, and of course they smoked it. And so people were discriminating against them. Blacks were smoking it and people were discriminating against them. So it does have a lot of racial overtones, just like the reason why hemp.
I did not know that. Okay.
Just like the reason why hemp became illegal was not necessarily because it came from the cannabis plant, but it was made illegal by the paper and the textile groups, because George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, all of them used to grow hemp. And
really?
Yeah, our founding fathers grew hemp. And it was a textile. It was made ropes. You can make paper out of it. I mean, you can do all sorts of things with it. And again, it became illegal because like the cotton manufacturers were like, they're putting us out of business. Everybody, it's cheaper, it's more durable, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. And so everybody was needing to do away with this. So they made hemp illegal too. Anyway, that's all your
Okay.
political background. More history than what you've ever wanted to know.
So I'm fascinated by it. I had no idea.
Yeah, it really is interesting when you start looking at everything about it. But going back to the original ideas, I say, look, I don't care if you want to call marijuana cannabis, that's fine. The issue is that we need to come up with a better definition. Because if we're calling cannabis anything with THC, and you put hemp also in that definition of what cannabis is, and then you slap on a cannabis exclusion on your policy,
Mm-hmm.
then of course you are saying you don't cover, CBD, CBG, hemp, marijuana, nothing. And that may be fine. Okay, fine.
But what else has THC in it?
Well, see, that's just it. Hemp does. So let's say that you want to insure hemp now because it is legal. So they do have these exclusions, cannabis exclusions with hemp endorsements, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or exceptions basically. And so what that will say is we don't cover cannabis. However, anything from hemp we will cover, and then they'll list a whole bunch of things like seeds and plant material and yada yada yada. And then of course cannabis is in quotes, so you go down to the definitions, and they haven't changed the definition, because the definition is cannabis is anything with THC. Remember that hemp has 0.3% or less THC,
Mm-hmm.
delta 9. And I mean, that's literally, so okay. And then they keep going down to like part 2, which literally names hemp in the definition of what quote cannabis end quote is that they're trying to exclude. So you are now in a circular argument.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know that, so either no one has called their attention to it, even though I'm sitting over here yelling and screaming about it for like 4 years. I've been yelling and screaming about this and no one's paying me attention. I feel like Chicken Little, basically. But, or everybody's like, no, we get it. Nah, it's fine. It's all okay. And I kind of get their idea, where they're saying it's okay. We all know what we mean. So we don't need to clean up this wording. I think there's going to be a major issue if they don't. But Bill Wilson, like we've talked about before, genius with policy wording and all this kind of stuff. He talks about it, and I can't remember the Latin phrase. You probably know it, and he's probably yelling at the radio right now if he's listening to it, what that wording is. It's that wording where you look at all the other words around an exclusion to define what it means if it's not really defined. So you don't like torture language or whatever, obviously, like what I'm doing. So whatever that Latin phrase is, yeah. So maybe that's what they're doing. I have no idea, but that's why I have a problem with the word cannabis for marijuana.
Uh-huh.
We can call it cannabis, I don't care. But it can't be defined as anything with delta or anything with THC in it. I mean, maybe
What would you want to, if knowing what is intended, because once you get into, I think it's problematic once the industry says, well, everybody knows what we mean. It's almost a concession that you haven't clearly stated it.
Right. And I get that. I do. And that's why we end up with all this litigation. And my husband has accompanied me on all of these marijuana seminars and everything. And so he could probably give the speech just as much as I can, because he hears me just ranting about this and muttering underneath my breath and all of that kind of stuff. But the thing is that you're absolutely right. If he says this is so cool, we're at an emerging market, like you said. Think about it. It would be like car insurance in the early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
We can set it however we want to. And
But
obviously,
it's just got to be clear.
yes. And obviously, I don't want there to be litigation over it,
Mm-hmm.
even though that's my job as an expert witness. To sit there and go, this is what a
Right.
claims adjuster should do, or whatever. And I mean, you're an attorney, so you're like, woo, let's go litigation. But still, I just it's better for everyone if there's not any litigation, because that means premiums can drop, and we're not paying all this extra money and stupid
So how
attorney.
would you define it then? I mean, what would be a suggestion on what to do?
Well, I've thought about that because I've been asked about it before, and I still don't have a really good answer. And I'll tell you why. Is because even when this was written, all we knew about was Delta 9 THC, which is marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, since I've been studying it for 4 years, and I mean, it's been going on for longer than 4 years, but I've only been studying it for 4 years. We've come up with Delta 8. We've come up with Delta 10. We've come up with like 20 more cannabinoids: CBD, CBG, LMNOP, XYZ, ABC. I mean, whatever language we choose, we know is going to be limited, because by its very nature, insurance moves more slowly than
Sure.
the marketplace. So even if we said cannabis is 0.3% or more Delta 9 THC,
Uh-huh.
which meets the hemp, I mean, which you know, dovetails to the hemp legal, federally defined legal definition of hemp, which is 0.3% or less, then that's fine. That's what we'd say. That's what cannabis is.
Mm-hmm.
0.3% or more THC, Delta 9, and dry weight, yada, yada, yada. Then I think we would be okay. But then you have to sit there and go, okay, great. Now we don't have an exclusion though for Delta 8, which is how we're getting into those loopholes that a lot of states have,
Right,
where
right.
you've got convenience stores selling Delta 8 or whatever, and it's just like one hydrogen or oxygen or some kind of chemistry thingy off of Delta 9. And I've
Right.
actually even heard that if you leave marijuana Delta 9 on the shelf long enough, it degrades into Delta 8. Now,
Oh, for goodness.
whether that happens or not, like who keeps it around that long? Certainly not me, because I'm in Kansas where everything is illegal. As I joke, we have ruby red slippers, but we do not have any other kind of fun in Kansas. So
Well, Dorothy may have with the way she dreams.
well, this is true, but that might be the
And
whole
she lived on a
psilocybin
farm.
thing, which
She
is a
lived on a
whole different,
farm.
yeah, whole different podcast, you know. The shroom stuff. So who knows?
Have you written articles about this? Have you?
Yeah, yeah, I have. I haven't done it in anything recently because in fact, my husband was asking. He goes, you haven't spoken about this recently, and I said, I kind of feel like I'm a one trick pony, because right now, since it's not federally legal, um,
Mhm.
I have not been contacted for a lot of claims about this. Most of the claims and the lawsuits that I hear about with marijuana is about directors and officers, mergers and acquisitions, and that kind of
Oh,
thing.
yeah. Are
where,
there like reps and warranties? Do you deal
yeah,
with that on the marijuana component?
yeah. And didn't like Dirk talk about that or something? Um,
Yeah, I think Dirk did.
uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah.
but
So
to be able to still be out there knowing that it's gonna be coming.
yeah, yeah. And so that's why I feel like I should probably start up again. However, it's like there's only so many times that I can yell and scream at people before they're like, yeah, we're just going to tune you out. Like the other thing that I think is a huge, huge issue, especially with growth facilities, for example, is how are we going to value this plant?
Yeah.
Because um, 9 times out of 10, the way that it's grown is you have a mother plant and then you have clones, and then it's the clones that propagate. So, what happens if a fire goes through and kills all your plants? Or what happens is that because marijuana comes from the bud of the plant, if it has smoke damage, it's not like an apple or banana or an orange where you can wash it off or peel it. If there is, um, smoke damage, that bud is tainted, and that goes there. There goes your whole crop.
Hmm.
What is the ACV of un, or just like, I don't know.
Can you have an RCV ACV policy with
I've seen them.
marijuana?
I've seen them, but the issue is that it right now, and in fact, it depends on your person or your insurer. 9 times out of 10, it's just your normal property policy kind of deal. And you
Really?
sit there and you go, okay, great. What's the depreciation of marijuana? I mean, because what's the ACV? What's the ACV of marijuana? It would be like this. What would be your ACV of a cigarette? You've already smoked
Mhm.
it. It's in ashes. I mean, that's the used version of marijuana.
Interesting. How
So I sit there from a claims point of view and I go, how are we going to settle this? Now, a few insurers have clued into this, at least for the growth facilities. And they do this brilliant thing because they've adapted it from farms, which is of
Mhm.
course clever. If it's 0 to like seedling to 3 weeks, it's worth $300 a plant. If it's,
Mhm.
3 weeks to 6 weeks, it's $500 a plant, da 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 da. And the mother is worth 1,000 or whatever. And that's what we would pay per plant, you know, and that makes sense. And in your store, well, that works just like any other kind of store. You would take your retail value, not your retail value, I'm sorry, you would take your like your bought value, not your retail value.
Mhm.
Like you would pay what they bought it for, not what they're selling it for. So if they bought this piece of marijuana for $40 that got stolen, you would pay the $40, not the $60 that they're selling it for.
Well, so if you're insuring it as you grow it, like from seed to harvest,
Right.
would that would fall really within the scope of like a crop insurance type policy,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
and they do have crop, policies, but the
Like
thing.
it would I would hope it's a scaled down version because I don't know anyone who owns, well, Willie Nelson might in
um,
conjunction with Snoop, but
it's
you know,
funny. I did write,
plenty
yes.
100 acres on growing pot, you know.
Oh, well, so Let's talk. CMR Consulting proudly sponsors the video recording of insurance suits. You now have a choice of watching or listening to the podcast. Go to YouTube and search for Chantal Roberts or CMR Consulting. So I did this talk, and I did a whole what's it called? Like not when you sign up and you have to take a test and all of that kind of fun stuff. In fact, I've done that a couple times for marijuana, one for claims, and one for
Like a
ERMI.
certification?
Yeah, for ERMI. And that one was for agriculture. And I was talking about the farming and what have you. And of course you can now farm hemp as well. And it's really kind of funny because the poor little hemp farmers have to, because remember, hemp comes from the same family as cannabis. And so it smells like cannabis, marijuana. It looks like marijuana, but it doesn't have THC delta 9, so you can't get high off of it. So this poor little hemp farmer up in Vermont has all of these signs up like every 10 feet around his property saying, "This is hemp. You can steal it, but you're not going to get high from smoking it." And
So it's not just me who doesn't know the difference.
Right. I mean, obviously there's some idiot out there trying to go like, woo, there's a whole farm of it. Now, out in California, there's a huge black market, actually. And I talked about that in several of my articles. And
Okay.
and the issue is because I used to be one of those people who were like, yeah, let's like make everything legal and let's tax the bejesus out of it, and we can give it to first responders and teachers and reform lives and drug addictions and all of this kind of stuff. And the problem is, and I didn't realize this until again studying it, is that of course with all of those taxes, it makes the black market cheaper. And so in
Yeah, and unregulated.
Yeah, because you don't have to pay all those taxes, right? So and plus okay, so put a pin in that thought right there about taxes. So in California, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department did this bust of, I kid you not, $1 billion from illegal drugs. Because they had a great big old in the Mojave Desert. They had a great big old outside, facility, and it was all illegal. And you're just like, wow.
Well, can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
Because I do a lot of arson and fraud investigations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of arson cases in like Toledo, Akron, Youngstown, a lot of them. One of those fires, as I research into the background of these people, so guy has a fire, can't remember if it's Toledo or Akron, and I start looking into his background because I'm going to take his examination under oath, and I find out he'd been to prison for like 6 years, and he ended up being a small player, but it was a marijuana ring. So I can't believe I didn't instantly think that when you're talking about it, but because it doesn't directly relate to my claim, but it's his background.
No. Let me tell
And
you, since
crazy.
you do a lot of fraud and a lot of arson, let me tell you about the fraud and arson and vandalism rings that are coming from, and usually the way that it works is that it'll start out on the East Coast or the West Coast and move inward. And the way that this is going is you will have a absentee landlord buy a house in the, he's going to flip it, quote unquote, flip it. And while it's being renovated, it gets set on fire. So the insurance company pays because he has insurance on it, right? And it's, an electrical fire or whatever. I mean, it's clearly not anything.
I see those all the time.
Okay, hold on. So then what will happen is the electrician will go back in and just like wire the whole place then for an illegal growth facility.
Get
And
out.
yes, so wait, hold that thought, because so these guys are growing marijuana illegally. And the way that you will know as the neighbors that this is happening is that you'll see lights on all the time. There's got to be someone coming in and out, making sure that the water, automatic water is on, blah, blah, blah. So you'll see someone come in and go immediately to the garage and shut the door. Shades are always drawn, lights are always on. You can't ever find anybody at the house. Yard usually isn't maintained. They surely aren't watering the grass or anything like that. And usually you've got a couple of inches or so because nobody's out there mowing it or anything like that. Basically, it's a huge lack of upkeep, right? So when the guys, the rings, start thinking that people are catching on, they will leave. And of course, when they're ripping out all of the materials and stuff, it leaves what appears to be vandalism. So then the landlord, who again is out of state, will file another claim for vandalism and an illegal growth facility. And I didn't know about it, quote unquote, because I'm from out of state. And you go, well, how'd they pay you? And oh, I don't know. you need to talk to my property manager who you can never get on the phone and yada, yada, yada. So essentially what's happening is that these insurance companies are paying for illegal growth facilities twice.
Well, so let me ask you this. They have to make sure that they don't burn the whole house down, right?
Right.
So they have to have like a partial fire.
Well, what happens is that they usually have a partial fire to
Or
get
partial
money.
burn.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
to get money. They repair it enough to add electricity and, more voltage or whatever, because you've got to put up lights in there. You got to put up, the growth lights and all that kind
So
of stuff.
before the first fire, they don't have a growth facility in there.
No,
So
no,
they
no.
could
It's
have,
literally a vacant house that they're quote unquote flipping.
well, that's what I get see all the time. And they
Yes,
buy renter's insurance, but they don't have a renter in there.
right.
Or they buy homeowner's insurance and they're not living there.
Right. Well, that's a whole different issue because of and I always bring up Bill Wilson because I really respect him. He and I totally disagree on this one thing about the definition of a resident premises on the HO3 policy. But that's a whole different conversation. We should get him on.
I tried a case on residence premises in
Yeah.
February 2019 in
Oh,
federal
I'd love
court.
to hear about it. Off
And
topic.
so, yes, someday we'll talk about it. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's the definition can be problematic depending on what jurisdiction you're in.
absolutely. Yeah. So I think that we should probably conclude because I mean, I could go on for
Oh
eight
my God,
hours.
it's fascinating. I could talk to you forever about it.
I think it's really fascinating. So yeah,
So what are we going to do about Brenda? Is she coming on?
yeah, okay, I'll reach out to her. And I think it would be hysterical to have her on 4/15, April 15th, in honor of 420.
I like it.
Yeah.
Tell everyone what 420 is.
Oh, well, it's 420, smoke them if you got them, basically. Yeah.
Okay. I
So
didn't know what it was for a long time.
for a long
I
time. Yeah.
I am the hugest rule follower you will ever meet. So,
Well, I talk a really big game, but I'm totally a rule follower. Like my bark is way worse than my bite.
um, yeah, Chantal, this is so fascinating.
Yeah, so let's
It's like
let's
I think I got a big education on this.
yeah, so let's let me reach out to Brenda and
Let's get her on. That's
yeah,
awesome.
I feel like we should be doing some kind of conclusion on our podcast, but I don't remember what it is. So my name is Chantel.
Well, where can we find you? And hey, FYI, the AMCO annual meeting is coming up in May.
We should talk about that, yes.
And
So if you want to join,
yeah, AMCO, just as an FYI, um, Chantal and I are obviously both members of AMCO. It's insurance consultants and management. Um, the best group of people. It's a tight knit group, even though it's a growing organization. We are having our annual meeting in May in Boston, and
mhm,
I actually think I call him my man Mike and our daughter. They are going to come out um, that weekend, but spouses come and we have dinners. I presented there last year. It's it's awesome. The group is awesome.
I love
Um,
that.
I'm telling you, anyone who is interested in being a part of an organization of insurance professionals, whether it's underwriting, accounting, um, claim expert, consultants, insurance agents and brokers, producers, this is the cream of the crop and the nicest group of people on the planet.
Absolutely. So I found it. It's like I haven't done this in so long. No, so I would definitely say, unfortunately, I am not going to be there.
I know I'm
But
going to miss you.
yeah, I am either going to New Orleans for a cannabis seminar.
Is
Um,
that DRI?
yeah. So, New Orleans, Boston, cannabis, insurance geeks. Um, so
It's
mm,
hard. It's a
yeah. But
hard choice, but yeah, you'll get a ton out of the DRI thing.
then, unfortunately, I found out I have a 2-week trial during that time. And I mean, they won't obviously need me for the whole 2 weeks, but I'm
You don't know when you're going to get called, right?
right. And so I keep pushing the attorney, like, hey, when are you going to call me? And he's like, I don't know, trial's still going. I'm busy. I'm like, oh man. Anyway, so yeah. This,
Awesome.
I know this wraps up another Insurance Suits podcast. I'm Chantal Roberts, and I'd like to thank my co-host, Amy Johnson, for joining us. We'll be back in 2 weeks because I'm definitely getting Brenda on here.
Love
So
it.
yes, please follow, subscribe to our podcast on your favorite distribution channel. Give us a review, preferably a 5-star one. And just like what Amy was saying, if you need an insurance consultant or an expert witness, go to www.aimco.com. Or if you are a consultant and expert witness, you want to go to our page and learn more about us, we'd love to have you. So come be with us. It's fun. Amy, you want to give your information?
Yes. So I am still a practicing insurance litigator and I do expert work in consulting. You can find me, Amy Johnson, you can reach me at 312-547-9555, which is my cell number, or you can find me at www.heplerbroom, HEPLERBROOM. Amy.Johnson@heplerbroom.com is my email. Reach out, even if it's a 20-minute question you want to ask. We don't need to open up a file to talk insurance.
Yeah, you're so helpful about that. So we'll see everybody in like 2 weeks.
Awesome. So long.
Bye.